Study Session 1. The Meaning and Value of Logic. Introduction. In this study session, we will examine the meaning of logic in the strict, technical, and professional sense. We will also be looking at the relevance of logic to the concerns of daily life. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the fundamental principles of logic. 2. Present the value and relevance of logic to the concerns of daily life. Laws of logic. Let us start on a frank note. The word logic is not new to many of us. We have heard of it before, and many of us have used it severally in our speeches and writings. But despite its familiarity, it is a word that most people find difficult to define in clear terms. This is because the word logic can be used in at least 3 different, yet equally correct senses. In the first sense, the term logic is used to describe the totality of all laws guiding the human thought. Wallace, 1974. It is a truism that humans are rational beings whose thinking processes are based on certain principles. The totality of these principles has been described by many using the word logic. In another sense, the word logic can be used to describe the principles guiding the operation of a mechanism. Every gadget or thing has its own inner logic, which describes the way the gadget ought to operate. For instance, when we operate our GSM handset, it follows a particular procedure. If a call comes in, we press the receive button and the call is received. To end the call, we press the end button. If we press the end button and the handset starts sending messages indiscriminately, then something is wrong, and the set will be set not to be operating the way it ought to operate. That is, according to its inner logic. The operation of a mechanism is therefore guided by certain principles, which can be referred to as the inner logic of that mechanism. The foregoing conceptions of logic are all correct in their own right, but these are not the only senses in which we seek to define logic in this course. Here, we are interested in the meaning of logic in the strict, technical, and professional sense as an academic discipline. In this sense, logic is that branch of philosophy that deals with the study of the basic principles, techniques, or methods for evaluating arguments. Evaluation here involves making a distinction between good and bad, valid and invalid, deductive and inductive, as well as sound and unsound arguments. Understood in this sense, logic reflects upon the nature of thinking itself. Popkin and Stroll, 1993. It attempts to answer such questions as: what is correct reasoning? What distinguishes a good argument from a bad one? Are there methods to detect fallacies in reasoning? And if so, what are they? These preoccupations of logic distinguish it from psychology, which concerns itself with the mental processes of the thinker. See Azenabo, 2001. Although reasoning is a form of thinking, the fact is that not all thinking is reasoning. One may think about a number of issues without doing any reasoning about them. In other words, there are many mental processes in which the psychologists may be interested, which are nevertheless different from reasoning. Reasoning is a special kind of thinking in which inferences take place. The psychologist merely examines the thinking process, while the logician concerns himself with the formulation of rules that will enable us to test whether the particular piece of reasoning is correct, coherent, and consistent. This distinction between correct and incorrect reasoning is the central problem with which logic deals, and all the principles and techniques of logic have all been developed primarily for the purposes of making this distinction clear. However, the principles, processes, and techniques of logic are not arbitrary. This is because there are certain fundamental laws that every thinking process must follow for it to be correct. We have three of such laws. These are the law of identity, the law of contradiction, also known as the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle. The law of identity states that if any statement is true, then it is true. In other words, every single statement is identical with itself. The law of contradiction states that no statement can both be true and false at the same time. For instance, my statement, Professor Francis Egbohare is a man, is true. I cannot claim that it is false at the same time. If I insist that the statement is both true and false at the same time, then it is either I am completely delirious or I am under a serious attack of amnesia. Finally, the law of excluded middle states that any statement is either true or false. We cannot say that a statement is neither true nor false. There is no such middle ground. The law is to the effect that if a statement is not true, then it is false, and if it is not false, then it is true. These are the laws which all statements or reasoning must conform to for them to be taken as correct. All the branches of philosophy, and indeed other areas of knowledge, employ thinking and reasoning. But whether the reasoning is correct or not will depend upon whether it is in accord with the laws of logic just described. Joyce, 1936. This makes logic the most fundamental of all branches of knowledge. How do we then explain the relevance of such a discipline to human endeavors generally? Value of logic. The question of the value of logic deserves as much attention as that devoted to the issue of the meaning of logic. What benefits, one may ask, can anyone derive from the study of logic? Or, put more generally, of what benefits is logic to human endeavors generally? This question is apposite because, as Ludwig Wittgenstein once remarked, what is the use of a discipline if all it does is to enable you talk about some abstruse questions, and if it does not improve your thinking about important questions of everyday life? Kahane, 1978. As a discipline, logic is relevant to the human person in several important ways. In the first place, in real-life situations, we encounter arguments in our everyday activities. These arguments are usually more complex than and not as organized as those we find in logic textbooks. They also pose a lot of problems to the human mind, in the same degree that long and complex mathematical problems do. As an act, logic induces in us certain abilities that enhance our capacity for the development and construction of good arguments. A person who has some training in logic will therefore be in a better position to analyze issues with a view to differentiating the essentials from the inessentials than a person without any training in logic. In fact, a critical analysis and examination of whatever we read in books, watch on television, or even discuss in our everyday conversation will be of great help in the development of human knowledge. Such reflective thinking can lead to fruitful deductions or inferences. Thinking is an essential ingredient of life, but thought, like all potent weapons, is exceedingly dangerous if mishandled. Clear thinking, which logic enhances, is therefore desirable not only in order to develop the full potentials of the mind, but also as a means of avoiding disaster. As Blaise Pascal once remarked, all our dignity lies in thought. Barry and Socio, 1988. And logic is the anatomy of thought. Hospesal and Marans, 1978. With the tools of logic, therefore, people can easily think through popular opinions and dangerous beliefs and arrive at some knowledge that will be of relevance to the promotion of peaceful coexistence among the people. How would you define logic in the technical sense? From what you have learned so far, we believe that your definition would regard logic as a branch of philosophy that is concerned with studying the basic methods or techniques for evaluating arguments. Again, training in logic can affect a person's character and attitude. Someone with a good knowledge of logic will be rational and more intellectually alert. He will be slow to accept other people's ideas without proper scrutiny, and he will be more likely to question his own prejudices and rationalizations. Once more, an individual with a tint of logic is less likely to be influenced by political demagogues or advertisers' pleadings. Such a person can easily spot or detect fallacies and inconsistencies in different lines of argument. He knows how to make a distinction between persuasions through various psychological techniques and those based on rational arguments and supportive evidence. Aja, 1992. Finally, the value of logic is better appreciated in the law court. Court proceedings and dispute settlements testify to the relevance of training in logical reasoning. Cases are often won in the court given the force of the arguments and evidences presented in support of those cases. Even in ordinary communal dispute settlements, people look forward to convincing evidences and persuasive arguments. What is explicit or characteristic of training in logic is that it enables us to provide good reasons as evidence for whatever claim we wish to establish. Training in logic will help enhance the capacity for well-structured and convincing arguments. We need to emphasize that what we have celebrated as the benefits of logical training can only be made possible where people already possess some natural abilities. These abilities include some form of native intelligence, fertile imagination, curiosity, and ingenuity, amongst others. These are the needed raw materials for the effective learning of logic in the formal sense. One main point which we have been able to deduce from our discussion so far is that a training in logic will help to bring the relation of the discipline to the concerns of our daily lives into clearer perspectives. It is now an incontrovertible fact that the ability to think clearly and to analyze arguments logically is of tremendous practical importance. If, according to Blaise Pascal, all our dignity lies in thought, then we must, in agreement with him, strive to think well. Study session summary. In this study session, we noted that logic is that branch of philosophy that deals with the study of the basic principles, techniques, or methods for distinguishing between good and bad arguments, valid and invalid arguments, deductive and inductive arguments, as well as sound and unsound arguments. In logic, there are three fundamental laws that every thinking process must follow for it to be correct. They are the law of identity, which states that if any statement is true, then it is true. The law of contradiction, which says that no statement can both be true and false at the same time. And the law of excluded middle, which states that any statement is either true or false. With that, we've come to the end of study session 1.